sit back, relax, and let's have a chapter chat. I'm your host, Jessica Foster, and today we are going to take a trip to California with best-selling author Kerri Maher. Thanks for being here, Kerri.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And I say we're going to California because that's where your latest novel, Summer of Love, is based. And this has so many wonderful elements in it.
Thank you. I'm holding up the cover here. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
And the cover is beautiful also. We're both wearing red today.
We are to match the Golden Gate Bridge that's on the cover of the novel. It's always so fun to design. I don't do the designing of the cover, but it's like a really fun conversation I get to have with my editor about like the kinds of elements that we might want to see on the cover. So it's really cool to see it in real life.
Yes, seeing it come to life. I know that is an author's dream. And for those who haven't had an opportunity to read the book yet, let's give them a brief synopsis.
Okay, well, the shortest version is that it's a family secrets novel set mostly on a winery in Napa, California. The slightly longer version is it's a dual timeline novel. And one of the timelines starts in 1967 during the Summer of Love in San Francisco, the beginning of the counterculture revolution, all the hippies in the Haight-Ashbury. And the other timeline stays in 2015, and they ultimately come together.
And how did you come up with the idea for this novel?
Unlike with some of my previous novels that had a nice, tidy answer to this question, this is a little messier. So I knew that I wanted to write a novel set in California because it's where I'm from. I was born and raised in California. Although I've lived most of my adult life on the East Coast, I now live outside of Boston, Massachusetts. But I visit family there in California regularly. I knew I wanted there to be a road trip element. I knew that I wanted to have an addiction and recovery storyline in there. And so I had all these ideas kind of swimming around in my mind, and they didn't come together with characters until I did a creativity course called The Artist's Way it's by Julia Cameron. It's a 12-week course in a book. And one of the key components of it is doing morning pages. It's a type of journaling you do first thing in the morning. And it really was like magic. I did the morning pages for a few weeks, and Miranda, Winnie, and Dawn, who were the three narrators of the book, kind of walked on stage in my mind and said, "We are your characters."
And I love when authors describe how they develop their characters because it really is a unique journey for every author.
Yeah, for every author and for every book, I've gotten ideas from books from listening to the radio, from watching television documentary series, from, remembering reading a memoir, 20 years before. They come from all kinds of places.
And the addiction and recovery element in this novel, was that difficult to write about?
Well, so you're talking to somebody. I am now about 4.5 years sober myself. So
Wow.
It was something that was very fresh in my lived experience, right? I'm still on that path. And, I have really found recovery to be a joyful process. It hasn't been, I think often the addiction recovery storyline is often portrayed as this terrible journey. And listen, there are often some bad parts of it, right? Everybody's like rock bottom looks very different, and sometimes it doesn't look like a bottom at all. And I really wanted to be able to write about this subject in a different way, a way that a little bit closer to the way I experienced it, although this is not an autobiographical novel, but I definitely brought a lot of my own lived experience to the subject.
And Kerri, I think that is very powerful. And at the beginning of the book, in the first pages, before you even get into the meat of it, you say, "For all the sober women who have walked before and alongside me, I am inspired by you every day."
It's so true. There were two early in my kind of sobriety journey. two books came out in early 2000, early 2020. One by Laura McCowan called "We Are the Luckiest," and another one called "Quit Like a Woman" by Holly Whitaker. And I read both of them. I was already following the two of them on social media, and so I was aware kind of their following and of their posts. And I really read their books and was so inspired by their stories and saw so much of myself in their stories. And serendipitously, kind of during the pandemic, Laura McCowan hosted some online Zoom sort of AA type meetings before AA figured out how to get online. And it naturally, organically grew into this community called the Luckiest Club, which I'm a part of. I'm a proud member of the Luckiest Club. And it has really been through the Luckiest Club, which has had a lot of women in recovery sort of walking this path that I'm describing. And I made a lifelong ride or die friend in those Zoom rooms. And it's been great for me.
And Kerri, was writing about it, writing a character who's also dealing with that, was that also healing?
It was. It really was. And curiously, I think a lot of times when writers bring some of their own experience to bear on characters, sometimes that can feel uncomfortable. But for whatever reason, this didn't feel uncomfortable to me. I was just like, I want to write kind of like the truth, the emotional truth, the essence of it, and also I think it's important to note there are addiction and recovery stories in my family, also my family of origin, not my family of origin, but the larger family that I come from, aunts and uncles. And I was really inspired by them. And some of them are very California based. So I had a lot of interesting things to say on this subject when I kind of got into the meat of this novel and these characters.
And you're openly sharing your journey. Is that a difficult thing? Do you ever feel vulnerable doing that? Or do you think that it is so important for people to hear other people's stories?
I think it is so important for people to hear other people's stories because no two stories are alike, and you never know who your own story will reach and get them to think differently about this subject. And we're not just talking about people who might be struggling with their own alcohol or substance use. We're also talking about reaching the friends and family members of people who might be struggling, who maybe don't really understand what that person might be going through. And in an essay or a novel, it's a nice sort of soft, safe space in which to learn about this journey and what it might be like for someone, someone close to you, or if you're in it yourself, what it might look like for you. And I think that those stories really are important to be telling.
And I think that it's important for people to know that there is hope.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think more and more people, I don't know if this is a real term, but I'm going to use it, like the new sobriety. I feel like sobriety is kind of having a moment. There are mocktails on almost every, restaurant menu I go to, which is wonderful. It's not I think I alluded to this before. We don't have to, in order to stop drinking or stop using whatever it is you're using, you don't have to have a terrible moment. You don't have to have falling asleep in the gutter moment. You can choose to stop anytime. There's, I think, something that is being talked about more and more is there's a kind of inner knowing that you have that maybe this isn't working for you anymore. Maybe it worked for a long time. It was a way of like bonding with some friends and going out. It's a social lubricant, all the things we talk about. But at some point, usually people start talking about, like, there's this voice inside going, maybe this isn't good for you anymore. Like you don't feel great in the morning. um, and like I would try dry January and like it was impossible for me to get through that month. And that was another kind of like awakening. I was like, okay, Kerri, that is probably also not such a great sign.
Right.
So I really want to encourage people to listen to that inner knowing, because that's where the wisdom is.
And I love that you say that society is becoming so accepting of it and there is this movement. I am not a drinker. I have never been a drinker. And I remember like in the early to mid 2000s, you would go to business meetings and people would always say, "Do you want a drink?" I'm like, "Oh no, I'm good. I don't drink." And you would kind of get this look like, "What?" And
Yeah.
now I've noticed when I'm in business meetings or at a conference and I'm like, "Oh no, I don't drink." People are like, "Oh my goodness, that is so great. I need to do that." It's a movement.
I love hearing that story. I love it. I think one of the things that Lori and Holly, the people I referenced earlier, used to post all the time, and now I just see it everywhere, is like alcohol is the one drug you have to justify not taking.
Yeah. Yeah. What is
um,
that?
but I don't know, it's just so ubiquitous. There's so many reasons for it, but I love that is, but I love that not drinking is becoming much more normal. Like we don't have to justify it so much anymore. We don't sort of get the like eyebrow, like, why aren't you going to drink tonight? It's like, okay, would you like a spindrift?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I'm a person who always I like to be in control. And so I just never really, it's just not something I ever, partook in.
Yeah. Yeah. I know part of my story is that when I first tried drinking, I actually really did not like it. And I think
Yeah.
I also like to be in control. um, but for whatever complex set of reasons, I eventually drank past that feeling. And I enjoyed the feeling of being a little bit of out of control. And I think I was also under a kind of illusion that I was still in control when I was drinking. I think that was something I felt for a long, long time.
Well, I think it's wonderful that you are getting that message out and you have represented it so beautifully in Summer of Love, also. And I feel like this is a deeply layered novel.
I hope so. Like, writers, we sit at our desks for however long it takes to write a novel. Every writer is different. This novel took about 3 years from inception to copy edits.
Wow.
So, I'm sitting at my desk all this time, and at every kind of stage, I get feedback from readers. But feedback is from my agent and my editor, right? And so, but I went, a few rounds with my editor, building in those layers and making sure that the messages I wanted to convey were clear, but also not like beating people over the head with it. It takes a lot of work to create those layers, but I actually really enjoy that part of the process. I like to revise. Sometimes it is challenging. You know, you get a suggestion, it's the right thing to do, but you don't really know how to do it.
Yeah.
It takes I take a lot of long walks. I have, brainstorming conversations with fellow writers, all of which I also enjoy. I enjoy the collaborative aspects of being a writer, which I think writers don't talk about this as much, but we do talk to each other. Like when we're stuck, we call each other up and we're like, "Can you like chat with me for an hour about or half an hour about this thing that I'm struggling with in my book?" Particularly if that friend has read the draft, and then they can really help you lob ideas back and forth.
And I love that collaboration because you always think, oh, it must be a cutthroat industry. But as I have interviewed all of these authors, I realize that's not the case. I mean, I know that it can be a challenging industry, but I feel like there are so many collaborations and friendships that just manifest throughout the process.
You know, it is so true. I have found, particularly historical fiction, where I've kind of landed to be overwhelmingly welcoming, collaborative. People want to share, listen, like everyone gets FOMO, right? Everyone gets worried about their career and where it's going and all this other stuff. And that's just true. But for whatever reason, that has not translated into clickiness or, people being, holding tight to their, gatekeeping. There's no gatekeeping, like people want to share, at least the community of writers that I have fallen into, that has been true.
And let's talk a little bit about your career trajectory. How did it all happen? How did you become a best-selling author?
I love to tell this story, especially for writers out there who might be struggling on this path, because before my first historical novel sold, the one that's called The Kennedy Debutante, I wrote 5 unpublished novels,
Wow.
everybody. 5. 5. And, it wasn't that I don't think that they were bad books. And they, like, every book kind of got me a paving stone on the way to The Kennedy Debutante. And not a single word of those books that will never be published was wasted, because I learned so much as I was writing. I experimented, I dabbled in different genres. I wrote a young adult novel, I wrote a romance novel, I wrote, a paranormal novel. And every time I learned something new about the process, I learned something new about plotting a book, about character development. And I was just a writer who needed all that time and space. So the first of those 5 novels I wrote right after college. So I was about 22 years old, and I was 42 years old when The Kennedy Debutante sold. So that was 20 years and 5 novels. But I wrote my first unfinished novel in 5th grade. So when I was 10. So, and I find, as I meet more writers also, this is not uncommon. People talk about their debut novels. That's just the first novel that everyone is seeing.
Right. Well, you hear that and you think, oh, everyone's an instant success, but that's not necessarily true.
No, it isn't true. And the writing life is a long life. I have friends who had very early success with their writing, and then something happened. They tried to do something different, or the market changed, or their editor left the house. Like, there's so many things that can happen that can cause a career to kind of like take a break or stall. Or some people do it take a step back on purpose and then come back in, a few years later. So, I it's a marathon, not a sprint.
I like that comparison. A marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah. 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 And I think it's important to keep in mind.
And do you like to write more in the morning or in the evening? I know you talked about the journaling exercise. That was a journaling exercise in the morning.
Yes, I am a morning writer. If it does not happen in the morning, it will not happen at all. I am as much as I enjoy writing, I genuinely enjoy it. Even when it's difficult, I enjoy it. I will also just allow life to get in the way. I have a teenage daughter. I also have a day job that I really enjoy doing. There's laundry and dishes and dogs to walk and all the things, so I really have to prioritize it in the morning.
So you have a day job. So how early are we talking?
So the day job is actually a fairly recent addition. For many years, I taught, which had a more flexible schedule, but for a whole bunch of reasons that wasn't working for me anymore. And so I pivoted into mental health, working with families of kids who have complex mental health issues, which is so interesting and rewarding. The people I work with are amazing. I love being out in the world, kind of meeting people and all of that good stuff. Um, but it did fundamentally change my writing schedule. So before that, I would kind of get my daughter out the door, and sort of sit down at about 8 in the morning to start writing. Now I set my alarm for 5:45. I press the on button on the coffee machine, and by 6, I try to be sitting at my computer, which generally works out. I really tried getting up at 5. I couldn't make myself do it. I know a lot of writers. There's a thing called the 5 a.m. club.
Yes.
That they used to gather on Twitter. I don't know if it's still, I know it's not Twitter anymore, but there is a 5 a.m. club. It does still exist. I can't get there.
So I was a morning anchor for years. And so I would wake up between 2:45 and 3 in the morning.
Oy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so now that I have a more normal schedule, I tend to not wake up early anymore.
Yeah. I know. I've heard this about morning anchors. I don't know. What time were you going to sleep?
Well, see, that was the thing because, I have a husband and a daughter, and so I would want to have a normal family life. So I was going to bed probably 9:30, 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, which feels early compared to the rest of the world, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But you're just
Yeah.
not getting
Yeah.
much sleep.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Anybody who's getting up at any early hour, it's always a challenge. And I'm learning as I get older, I can't sleep super late on the weekends either because then on Sunday night I can't get to sleep at all.
right. Yes.
So, yeah.
Now, as far as your day job, did you have to go back to school and get some certifications for that, some additional education?
I really thought a lot about that. I thought about going back for like maybe a master's in social work. I already have a master's of fine arts, but I had a lot of conversations with people in the mental health field, and someone who was super helpful. She was like, Kerri, you want to work with parents. You don't necessarily need this bigger master's degree to do that. Why don't you get certified as a parent coach? So I looked into coaching programs and parent coaching programs, and that is what I ultimately did. I got certified by the Jai Institute for Parenting, they have a terrific program. And then, I do have a private coaching practice. So anyone else there listening, if you think you might need a parent coach, my website is The Well-Resourced Parent. That's the other hat I wear in life.
That's amazing. And so is that just for parents who maybe are having a difficult time navigating a child with some mental health issues going on?
Yeah, so for the true day job, not the private practice, parents and families get referred for all kinds of different reasons and from different channels. Sometimes a school will send them to us. Sometimes a therapist that they already have for their kid will send them to us. It's always interesting. It's like writing. It's a different journey for everybody, but usually the family is usually having it's come to some kind of head, right? Like either there might be some school avoidance happening, there might be some substance use happening. The family is generally at a point where they're like, we need extra help. And one of the things that this service provides is help coordinating care, because a lot of times, like when there is this kind of crisis moment, lots of providers need to be brought on board and brought onto the same page, right? So we have these meetings where someone from the school will attend, the child's private therapist will attend, maybe an occupational therapist will attend. So it's this very collaborative process that's super rewarding.
And do you see a lot of success stories once people seek that help?
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, it's a process called wraparound that has kind of been in mental health for a few decades now. It's often a state funded or partially state funded. In many states. I'm in Massachusetts. It's everywhere. The concept is everywhere. So yeah, it is a successful process, and we really are about family voice and choice. Like we really try to do what the family wants us to do.
I guess it's hard for people to navigate that on their own without some type of help.
Yes. And one of the things like we are a short-term service, like people can be in therapy for a long time. I've been in therapy most of my adult life, right? Like to process things, but that's not really what this service is. This service, we want them to leave us. um, you know, as a family partner, one of the things that I try to help parents do is learn to access the resources they need on their own without me, so that they don't need me anymore. I'm always partnered with someone who is a social worker who has that degree, and they are the ones who actually coordinate the care. They're called care coordinators, and they're the ones making all the phone calls and organizing all of these meetings that I've been referring to. But again, ultimately, our goal is for the parent to feel confident that they can do all that on their own.
And do you feel like this will inspire you to write about some of this? Of course, not identifying families,
Right,
but
right. Of course not. Yes, 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 yes. Well, so, I mean, one of the reasons I have this job is not just because of the parent coaching degree. It's because I have some lived experience in this realm. So yeah, I mean, this is definitely like the sobriety. Um, it's something that's on my mind and on my heart, and I don't know how it'll come out in my writing yet, but um, it of course, I would never directly write about anyone that I was working with. Just like these characters in this book are not me, and they're not my
right.
family members, and they're not anybody I know. But in some ways, they're about everybody I know.
Getting it out there, being open, talking about these
Yes,
things,
yes,
it's
yes,
important
yes.
for society as a whole because I do think that society still has a stigma around a lot of things.
100%. When I was doing the research, the earlier research for this book, Summer of Love, I thought I learned about Betty Ford of the Betty Ford Clinic. Okay. So she actually was one of the first public figures to really live her recovery out loud. First, she lived her recovery from breast cancer out loud, and that was like unheard of in the 1970s. And then ultimately, she did become addicted to alcohol and pills, and she was able to get clean and sober, and she founded the Betty Ford Clinic. And she was very vocal about her journey, and she wrote two memoirs. I read one of them called Glad Awakening. So she's like glad for her awakening to her issues, because her life became so much more fulfilling as a result of walking the recovery path. Um, and one of the things I loved learning about her is that when her husband was running for president, a lot of the signs and buttons would say, "Vote for Betty's husband." There was when she came out and talked about her breast cancer journey, there was you can Google this. I don't remember the exact numbers anymore, but there was an unbelievable bump in women going and getting their mammograms, and fortunately and unfortunately, getting diagnosed with breast cancer. It was called the Betty Ford effect. So there is real power in people coming forward and telling their stories and encouraging other people to do the same.
And I think that you are portraying that so beautifully in this interview and also in Summer of Love. It is just a joy to talk to you today. It's been so great.
Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you so much. It's been great talking to you too.
Yes. And if you haven't read Summer of Love, you've got to put it on your to-be-read list.
You've been listening to Chapter Chat. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Happy reading!